Well, thanks to the panelists. That was an outstanding panel and a great way to start the day. I'm going to invite them to come up to the table here. And if you have any questions, we have microphones on either side of the room. So raise your hand, and they'll come and find you. For the panelists, when you're answering a question, turn your microphone on with the button in front of you. But when you're done, I've been given strict instructions to tell you to turn it off. Okay, so on and off. Should I turn this one off?
No, it's fine. Okay, here.
So, thank you. So those were all brilliant talks and a really wonderful session. Thank you for that. So for Sheryl-Ann, I had a question. It seems to me that as you said, you proved through this project that kids could learn to do these things and be interested and move forward. And thinking from the perspective of K through 12 and then university education, as you're well aware, we're working on data studies and data science on this campus and things like that. And it feels like we're already behind the curve. Like we could have a whole generation of students that would be coming to us that would be much more sophisticated in use of data in lots of different ways than we might be prepared for. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
My honest first thought is, I wish Nancy was here. That really is her world in terms of sort of the youth development end of it. I think I just agree, I think is my sort of gut response. I think I agree, and I think, again, a lot of the work that I'm interested in, that Nancy's interested in, that Center for Regional Change is interested in, again, is this equity aspect of it as well. So really thinking about that I don't think that it's just that there's a whole generation of students that are going to be entering the university with that could have better skills, but that there are some students that are going to be entering the university that have these, and a lot more that don't. Joe kind of highlighted some of those numbers that we have, and then a whole other group of students that aren't going to enter the university at all. So I think it's about thinking about how do we sort of even that out, I think is something that I would be really interested to think more about. Yeah.
Thanks very much for a terrific set of presentations. My question's for Martin, but I invite all of you to respond. So I wanted to ask you about the ethics of studying digital footprints. So people are leaving these digital footprints out there. Justin's work is looking at the public releases, et cetera, of politicians and classifying them, including suggesting that they're attacking people and ridiculing people. So I wanted to know, the digital footprints I leave, to what extent are they fair game just because they're available in public fora, in these kind of Twitter streams or Google streams and Facebook streams?
Okay, so this is the question. It's sort of huge ethics question. The way I think about it is that the public, in expressing sort of these sort of moral or ethical dilemmas, tends to be in a position where they want to have their cake. They want to have access to services that make use of our digital footprint, and they want to eat it too. Then they want to maintain some notion of privacy. So it seems like certainly on the margins, there's things that we could do to be more ethical and encourage companies more ethical. But on the whole, it seems like society needs to make a choice, and that choice has perhaps already been made. We can allow corporations to intrude in our daily lives in ways that make things really nice, and we can, reserve tables at restaurants really quickly and get deliveries, and can have my heart rate tracked constantly and location all the time. But it turns out you've just given up a ton of privacy, and it also turns out a lot of these corporations that are providing you those services for free would like to make money because they're corporations, and so they're going to sell those things. And so people start to get uneasy about that. But I think by participating in that service and clicking through terms and conditions, which you agree to allow them all that access and intrude in your daily life, we're all participating in that. And so I think that's completely ethical. I think in that way, privacy is dead. There's no more such thing. The alternative to that, to saying that privacy is dead, is that we become much more reserved in allowing corporations into our public lives, into our private lives, and maybe have some reluctance about what the sort of private world intrusion looks like. That's a much broader set of changes I don't think people are ready for, given the current level of intrusion. So I think, given that we all like the goodies that come from it, it's very ethical.
I agree with what Justin said. I think, well, it's important, first of all, to understand that we are in the midst of this technologically driven revolution, of this paradigm shift, right, of a long wave. And we always have to create institutions while we're in it. We sometimes don't remember and we don't think so, but of course, before the car was invented, there was no DMV. And there were fierce discussions about if you should have a license or not. And people would say, no, you're patronizing my freedom, because who are you to tell me I cannot ride this motorized horse, right? So without a license. So there were these discussions, we are in the midst of that. We have to create this, and this is a serious thing. It's not like, oh, technology just happens to us. Every generation is faced with that, and our generation is faced with that challenge. So we are in this, they call that Schumpeterian long wave creative destruction kind of story. So yes, we have to look for that. Interestingly enough, the public doesn't seem to be all worried about that. As Justin said, you saw that especially after the Edwin Snowden revelations, people were like, oh, that's really upsetting, let's go back to Facebook. So they were not really, there's not really anything going on, seriously, that really shook up everybody. So yes, it seems the battle is on the one hand is decided, and the thing of privacy is obviously a little bit lost, because the private always has to go with the public, and what is public, what is private is surely blurred. Back in the days, you went to a public space, you went to the park, and you were, I don't know, making out, everybody could see. You were sure oh, everybody could see, I'm in public. And if I'm in private, if you make out at home, nobody can. However, now, there's not such a distinction. You're always in public, right? So, and therefore, private doesn't exist anymore because it's digital footprint. Now, the most revolutionary suggestions in this idea of creating kind of like a new institutional structure to that would be to really redefine intellectual property, and some people argue for that, and say, well, your data is your property. And same as we invented intellectual property a couple of centuries ago, we should now invent the data property, that every footprint that I leave behind is my property. Now I can sell it to you, and so people suggest to create markets, and markets are very good in intermediating supply and demand, and then I can sell my data that I own, my footprint, and I can sell it to companies. So that would be a more revolutionary step to take, and in line with modern institutions, markets, and so forth. And the response from Silicon Valley is basically, yes, we're already doing that, because I allow you to use my social media services for free, and you pay me with your data. So they said we already have that in place, kind of like, right? We don't have it in place for everything, but intuitively, at some aspects we already have. So there's a line where we're kind of like walking, pushing back, and pushing forward. So in that sense, I agree with Justin. I think the battle is pretty much over. It's pretty much won. Now, I don't really also, I came to the conclusion after so many years hearing and thinking about that yes, there's actually nothing really worrisome about it if it's in the realm, for example, of business, of economics, and so forth. And even with some other things, we have to worry about education, health. Some of them are less comfortable with, but they will also go away over the decades. However, what I'm really worried about with the end of privacy is democracy. Because democracy is the only, it's nice if they know what I want to shop for, if Amazon makes suggestions. But democracy is really, if you think the way it's set up, it's completely wrong functioning without any privacy. And maybe Justin can say more about that, because especially representative democracy is not set up for that. It's not set up for this level of transparency, be it that the free mandate is lost, be it for how actually, it's populism, if you talk what people want to hear and so forth. So the only way, and maybe Justin can talk more about that, what I think where the end of privacy is worrisome is that the way we execute democracy is not prepared for that. For business and whatever, that's for Amazon, that's just how it is, I think. Mm-hmm.
So not just to be like a quick wet blanket, I don't know that it's that resolved. And I think you see it when you start talking about democracy. I think you see it sort of in people's reactions to different kinds of institutions. So just an example, Canada ostensibly has no useful census at this point, because the long-form census was removed, and a huge amount of the rhetoric that the Conservative Party government made around removing it was around, we've gotten so many complaints about privacy in terms of the census, and why should the government know how many bathrooms I have anyways? But it's the same people that will post that complaint on Twitter and then also be like, oh my God, this funny thing happened in my bathroom the other day. So I think, I think it's that idea of like what our understanding of privacy is, I think is quite in flux. And I think that like on the sort of, on the research side, I think it's very convenient for us to feel as though the debate has been closed, because it is such an amazing resource to us. It's such an amazing resource to us. But I think that there's some really interesting research potentials for other folks to really think about what this meaning, what is that shift really, and what does it mean for these different institutions that we're all engaged in. So, I don't think that it's, hugely detrimental, but I don't know that the debate is completely closed. So.
Is to follow up on that, I think we don't always have a choice, right? If you want to be in a social network, which social network site says we won't use your information? You go on the web and it says, by going to this website, you agree that we will put cookies on and so on. But I think a more important thing is the use and prediction. And so the first speaker said that you could predict, well, actually I can't remember which talk it was, that with 70% probability someone is going to commit a murder again. And the current system of deciding, who should go on parole is not necessarily the best, but, and it probably is the case that it's better to use this big data, but what happens, now my private life has been exposed through social media and so on, that's being used in an algorithm which would be impossible to explain, and that says that with probability 0.3, I'm going to commit a murder again, and our threshold is if it's over 0.25, then you do not get released. Or another one would be whether you should receive medical treatment or not for a particular condition. And I think that's going to be the real battle. I think you're right, privacy is over, but what to do with these predictions of individual behaviour is a big issue.
Yes, I think, and I think that's a crucial point, especially for us in the social sciences. And so, because in the social sciences we have these funny objects that we study who supposedly have a free will, also to change. And that is very, very different from other sciences who use big data, who are also in this kind of, and many physicists and so forth who now come and do big data with us, with social science. They come from a completely different background because their systems, basically, they do not change. Right, they are basically the same since the Big Bang. So it's kind of like you're a physicist and you have the strong force and the weak force and gravity, and now imagine you just take gravity away and exchange it with a new force which is called internet. You can start all over again, right? And that's what we constantly do. That's why I said this is non-stationarity. And even we have this non-stationarity in the individual, as you say. So even so you were a murderer, and even so you still have some of these behavioral traits, we would say, well, you still have a free will to change in the future. Who says that you wouldn't? Well, the algorithm. Well, the algorithms. So there's these funny things in the social science where actually we always have non-stationary data, and even if because out of change, because the system's dynamic constantly changes, so we can use the old one. And the free will actually tells us that yes, people should have it and they should change. We should give them the opportunity to change. And data actually, what data does per definition, it locks us kind of like in these old patterns. Because that's what data does best. It looks into past patterns and then it kind of like assumes that the future pattern is like the old pattern. And that kind of like, so it reinforces path dependencies, if you think about that. Imagine I told you about these phones that match you with like-minded. So spin that a couple of years down the road, you will only encounter like-minded people. We're talking about polarization, right? It's like the algorithms will only match up actions-driven with actions-driven, emotions-driven with emotions-driven. And that's the people, and we see that in the internet already, right? If the light-minded is one click away, why should I bother with these other people who are, and it will create even more polarization. And we will reinforce past patterns because that's what big data does. It is based on past patterns, and it supposes that future patterns are similar. So it actually reinforces, polarizes, and puts these notions of change in doubt, be it personal change, a murder will change, or be it social change. I think it's important to notice.
Sheryl-Ann, I wanted to pick up on your very tantalizing invitation to humanists and ask you what that might look like. You mentioned that humanists deal with slow big data all the time, and that you see a lot of potential there, but I guess I want to push you to tell us what your ideal humanist collaborator would actually be doing and what kind of data they're looking at that you can connect to.
Yeah, I'll try to do this shortly or quickly. I think, so one of the things, it's funny, Martin, I've heard you talk about this before, but I don't think you mentioned it today, is that there's sort of, what we think of as big data, it seems like there's almost at least two different kinds, right? So there's sort of the sensor kind, which is that, what folks use in medicine, which is there's one individual and you're just collecting a lot of things about that one person. And then there's sort of this, these traces, these footprints that we're sort of skimming off of. And so a lot of the challenge with that sort of tracing and skimming is that there's all the things that we've said for 100 plus years you need for social science experimental research, right? In terms of you don't know what the population is, you can't, the sample doesn't, you can't, like all those things that you can't measure because you're just sort of skimming this data, right? And so, and representative, how many people actually use Twitter in this room every day, actually? Honest hands, right. Okay, so so that's our sample, right? So that's who we're drawing information from. And so I think, one of the challenges is trying to think about how do you then deal with that, right? How do you deal with sort of questions of representation or all those things that sort of we've borrowed from physical and biological sciences into social sciences. And so I think that and Michael Goodchild again sort of mentioned this idea of the other thing about it is that it's fast data. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting is that when you think about sort of the way that the way that histographies are produced, for example, you're not collecting this data specifically for that study. You're specifically trying to look at these traces, to look at these footprints that are left behind. And so I don't have an answer to this question. In part, I would ask you because I sort of teach this stuff, but I don't, but I don't know it as well as you guys do. Sort of, what are all the ways that you have to think about that? About constructing that corpus? What are all the ways that you think about kind of those questions of validity, those questions of representation, and thinking about how we could potentially sort of apply and morph and use those in our thinking around this sort of this fast big data that we're also now trying to deal with in these same sort of ways of traces and scraping and these leftover footprints. So again, I don't have a specific answer, but I think it's really thinking about what is the nature, what is the quality of this data, and it looks in some ways a lot more like those corpuses than it does like sort of biological or physical science data sets. So trying to think about that. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. I think there's one in the back.
This question is for Justin, especially given the use of, in your talk you just presented about having machine-coded data as well as hand-coded data, being able to compare the two, and you showed examples where the machine-coded data wasn't that useful, that you had to have hand-coding it for one of your variables you were interested in. When you're talking about trying to, as a social sciences researchers, trying to catch the wave, being able to make big data useful for our own personal work, what do you see the trajectory of the field going as far as the ability of machine coding and scraping programs to be able to actually give us the data we need for our research projects, especially when we're trying to capture complex variables?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, one of the things that I start off a class that I teach on text is data is, make the joke that if you want to study text, you're going to have to read a lot. Maybe that's not obvious to people who think, well, I'll just apply an algorithm, I'll never have to look at these documents, and that'll be the end of it. Okay, so the way I think to think about these methods is that they'll help you read better. And so at the moment, we can think about where these methods, how do they perform really well. And I think they do a really good job at organizing things and directing reading and measuring sort of broad concepts, like the kinds of things that I put up today. Subtle things become a lot harder, but there's certainly lots and lots of work going on to measure these sorts of subtle things. So algorithms are being developed. The sort of buzzword that's going around Silicon Valley right now is this thing called deep learning. Lots of skepticism around that term, just like all the other buzzwords. But the idea there is that these sorts of models will develop more complex models of what's happening that would allow more complex relationships that could capture these variables. So at the moment, I think what can happen is that these can capture variables that have been of long-standing interest to social scientists, and that we can then read and engage with our substantive expertise to validate those measures. And that going forward, these more complex models will give us some opportunity to capture these more complex relationships. So no one's proven that there's a limit to what can be captured yet, sort of like mathematically shown that. And so I think it's a matter of sort of technology, data, and elbow grease.
Well, that culminates the first panel. We'll take a short break and reconvene at 11. I really want to thank this panel and the panelists for outstanding presentations. This was really interesting, and thank you guys a lot.